situation they were in when God called them. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
It's humbling sometimes to come before you to preach because of the music in this church. Thanks to the bell choir, to the kids, to our choir. And I had one question for our Bach person back here, which is, it's I don't understand it, so help me. Fugue in G minor, and then in parentheses, little. What does that mean?
As opposed to
big?
a much bigger one.
Oh, you mean it's shorter?
Yeah.
You could have gone on a lot longer.
No. That's a whole one.
Okay.
There's another one also in G minor that's a whole lot bigger.
Oh, well, you could have played that instead. We'd sit here and listen all day to you and the choir. Okay, thank you. You all were thinking it, you just didn't ask it. Ye of little knowledge of music, said Harvey. There were times when my kids were growing up when we would say no to them about doing things. That's what parents do, right? It almost seems like a broken record sometimes. We would say things to them about doing certain things, and there's always that, great phrase, well, my friends are doing it, and you would say to them, well, your friends jumped off of a cliff, would you follow them? Unfortunately, I think for sometimes it's true, they might. But they would ask about going to friends that we knew little of, or they would want to have a sleepover in a place where we weren't sure. And it was our responsibility as parents to raise them in a way in which they would be able to understand eventually, now that they're in their 20s, they'd look back and they go, oh yeah, that's the way why you were. I was like, oh, the light bulb goes off in their heads. And we always said to them, one day you will have children and you will understand. I didn't understand that growing up when I was a kid. My mom, one of her favorite things to do was, instead of buying me new pants, she would, now how many of you can raise your hands and tell me if this happened at your house? My mom would sew on pieces of material that had nothing to do with blue jeans, and she would sew those in the bottom of my pants so that I didn't look like I was walking around in waders. How many of you had parents that did that? Just a few of us. We're going to start a support group, Larry and Mike, the three. I didn't see back here. Anybody? And Gail. Okay, the four of us are going to be in a support group. Man, I can't believe none of you had those parents. And my mom thought it was kind of a cool idea. Of course, when it was like, yeah, it's not funny, Carrie. She's laughing at me over here. And it wasn't material that wasn't even jean-like. It was just like something that she came up with, and she would sew them on the bottoms. And I was unique. I was the only kid in school that had those pants, as you can imagine. As you can tell, it left an indelible impression upon my life. But as we grew up, all of us in this room, we want to fit in, don't we? Even as adults. We don't want to stand out. We don't want to look different from everyone else. We want to kind of just make sure we go with the crowd, or we want to make sure that no one notices us. But as we call ourselves Christians, Paul is reminding us this morning of this fact that we have been called to be different and unique. In fact, we are called holy in the Bible, in Hebrew. Since we were doing Hebrew here this morning with the kids, we're going to learn another word this morning. It's kadosh, which simply means to be set apart. Now, God is something else altogether, and it's distinct, and He is anything and everything. But God is totally different from us, yet at the same time, God calls us to be intimate and reflect His holiness in our lives. We are to be like Christ and also like God because we were born in God's likeness. We are to be set apart too. So we can't keep on doing what we used to do because we did not know God. It tells us in the Scriptures over and over again. Paul keeps saying to us, Jesus reminds us of this, that we can't be like everyone else if you want to be God's child. And so there will be sometimes when we stand out. But when we blend in and when we look like everyone else, it's hard for people to figure us out because we look like everyone else. So there's a lot of pressure when you're a kid and even as an adult to conform, to fit in, to be like everyone else, right? Joshua Becker writes, "Decide today to live your life. You do not live your life like everyone else. Your life is far too valuable to be wasted on the life that everyone else is choosing." Hear that line again, because there's lots of us in this room who need to hear that. Your life is far, far too valuable. In fact, Paul says in Corinthians that God died for you. Christ died in your place. Far too valuable to be wasted on a life that everyone else is choosing. How many of us do that? We walk through our lives and we want to be like everyone else, and so we allow other people to make decisions for us, and we just go along with what everybody else decides. I always love when we break into small groups sometimes in different organizations. I used to do this when I was in seminary, and we would break down in little small groups, and people would start talking, and it was almost like groupthink begins. Everybody starts thinking the same way. I was one of those weirdos who would raise my hand and go, "How about this?" And people would look at me, That's what Paul's talking about this morning. Others' opinions and expectations upon our lives is unhealthy. If you live your life based upon what other people think about you, if you worry about how other people will think about you, then you're going to live an unhealthy life. I guarantee you that. And I also guarantee you that if you live your life based upon unhealthy expectations about what you feel about yourself and others, that will make it an unhealthy life. None of us in this room are perfect. And so it's impossible to live up to that idea and that notion. Trying to live up to everything and everyone can be exhausting. Trying to please everyone is impossible. And making others live that way is even worse. And pastors are the worst. We are one of the most unhealthy group of people on the planet. Because for the most part, a lot of us, we like to please people. We want to hear people say, great job, wonderful job. We don't want to hear criticism. We don't want to hear that we've made mistakes. We don't want to hear that we are going against the norm. We want to get along and fit. But when we try to conform, all of us in this room, we limit ourselves and we limit God's imagination of who we are. That's really the most dangerous thing that we can do. Paul says you were bought at a price. There's a story, maybe you've heard it. It's about an Easter chicken. I know, it's not Easter, and it's chicken. It's funny. So the story goes that there's this cute little chicken that was given to a child on Easter. And the chicken was dyed a bright color. You know what kids, they like to dye things. And so they dyed this chicken like pink or yellow. After Easter, when the chicken's novelty has worn off, it's tossed into the chicken coop with the rest of the birds. And the bigger chickens, of course, begin to peck away mercilessly at the odd and little bird because he's a little different, you know. And of course, he doesn't have a lot of sense to defend himself. But after a week or two, the Easter chicken has grown out of its feathers to the point where it's beginning to look like the others. You know, when you dye your hair. I don't have any hair, so I don't dye it. So it began to join the fray of the coop and was giving as good as it got. Soon it became indistinguishable from the rest. Now here's the point we need to hear. The guy telling the story says that the Easter chicken is like the church. He says we start out different, but it wasn't long before we can begin to act like everyone else, like that Easter chicken. Most of the time, we as the church, we who call ourselves Christians, are like the Easter chicken. Our color fades. And we begin to play like the rules of everyone else. And it's hard to begin to tell the difference between us and everyone else. We don't or we shouldn't be like everyone else. Now, hear this. This does not mean that we should not ever change. That's not what I'm saying. But it does mean that when wrong is abound, we need to be right. The world needs us as Christians to be different, not the same as everyone else. Hearing the words of Jesus, these words of forgiveness and grace, and above all else, His love. We must resist the impulse to explain those ideas away. We must let them haunt us and even change us to be a different kind of a person. We as followers of Christ, we have to. It's imperative that we stand out against the crowd. To stand against the injustice and the violence and the prejudice and the inequality, the big and the small things that are around us, and all the things that happen in our lives. Christ did not die for us. We were not bought for a price to blend in and conform with this world. We were meant to stand out, stand up, and speak out. And we have remained silent as the world around us and the culture around us has changed. And even, in fact, churches have, to the point where they reflect the society that we live in. There's a fine line we're living here, I know. But you see, Jesus was not at all concerned with our popularity. He could care less. He was more concerned about our faithfulness. He doesn't care if you're liked. He just cares that you are loved. In fact, He doesn't care whether you like other people, but He cares if you love other people. He even said, and he went further, he says, I don't care whether people hate you or revile you or scorn you or won't even forgive you. You need to love them anyway. Now, that may not make you like everyone else, but it will make you more like Jesus. Would you please join me as we stand for our last hymn? It is on page 156 of your hymnal.